So, everyone, welcome to the latest installment in the Non-Degree Credentials Research Network's webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Beyond a Bloom, Proposing a Radial Taxonomy for Microcredentials. I almost read that as radical, but I mean, it could be. We'll see. We'll see. Colin will present in a moment. So I'll turn it over to Colin Sullivan. Before I do, I'll give a brief introduction. Colin has been a member of the NCRN for a number of years now. He is the director of digital credentialing at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I was going to say the Harvard of the Maryland State public higher education system, although maybe more like the ASU in terms of how innovative they are in their approach to digital credentialing. So Colin will share some of what he's been working on, what UMBC has been working on as they think about how do we make sense of this wild, tangled mess of microcredentials that we see emerging on many college campuses these days. Before I do, well, I still have everyone here. Maybe I'll make a quick plug though and remind everyone to register for the NCRN conference that is coming up on May 19th and 20th. And we'll put a link in the chat. So while you're listening to Colin, you go navigate over to the NCRN website and be sure to register now because we are more than halfway to room capacity, which we're really excited about. A couple weeks to go. So, with that said, I'm gonna make sure that everybody is on mute except for our speaker, and we'll head over. We'll hand it off to Colin. Go ahead.
Thanks.
Welcome, Colin.
Thank you. And thank you, Kyle. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I'm sure our president would love to hear being regarded as the Harvard of the University System of Maryland. I'm sure I have some colleagues that want to fight over that, but that's for another day. So I'm really excited to be here. So again, Colin Sullivan, Program Director for Digital Credential Innovation at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I oversee our micro-credentials and digital credentials start to finish in every context. So curricular, co-curricular, for credit, non-credit, anywhere that we are issuing and creating micro-credentials, it makes its way in my shop, one way or another. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with everyone here today. So, just as some context and a little bit of grounding before I really dive in, we're obviously talking about taxonomies. And I think we're at a really great point in our field where having a taxonomy isn't a should I be doing this or should we be thinking about it? It's pretty concretely a best practice in digital credentialing. So there have been a number of institutions that have led this work over many years. Kennesaw State University, if you haven't checked out their taxonomy, highly recommend. Alamo College District, University Main System, all of these are pretty seminal taxonomy frameworks for what we're creating with our micro credentials and those kind of surrounding frameworks. And to that end, there are other organizations that have been instrumental in this work as well. One EdTech's Trusted Credential Framework also is, reinforcing the concept of the different types of credentials and micro-credentials that issuing organizations and institutions are creating. So, really, it isn't our conversation today isn't starting from a place of whether to have a taxonomy, because again, I'm operating under the assumption that we know that we should have a taxonomy. Now we're just asking questions about, do we have the right one? Does this make sense? And is this serving the purpose that we need and want it to? So that's kind of the framework for that. So here at UMBC right now, we have five different types of micro-credentials, but four primary in our taxonomy. And just like a lot of the taxonomies that I just mentioned, it's a taxonomy that's deeply rooted in Bloom's and the Dreyfus model for skill acquisition, as introduced to me from my colleague and mentor who I thought I saw, Sherry Costanzo, is here. So this is again marrying those two frameworks, Bloom's taxonomy and the Dreyfus model for skill acquisition. Knowledge, proficiency, and mastery are our three main types of micro-credentials that we offer. We also have the kind of catch-all engagement micro-credentials. So things like you attended a workshop or recognizing some level of achievement. We can talk about some of the skills and competencies that are or aren't there for some of those engagement or souvenir micro-credentials, but they can often serve an important purpose. But this framework that we have and this kind of taxonomy is meant to, like I often tell folks on our campus, we like to use it as the Rosetta Stone between what's happening on our campus and the learning that's happening and how we can translate it to external audiences so that they can have a better understanding. And the taxonomy helps us be able to ground some of that work. But now we're at a point where we're starting to ask some questions. We've had this taxonomy in place at UMBC for about 3 or 4 years at this point. And again, that foundation of that taxonomy is that Bloom's learning outcomes, right, which is what we rate most of our course level learning outcomes with, right, and what academics are familiar with. But Bloom, or at least the version of Bloom's that we have embedded into our taxonomy, is cognitively privileged, right? So it's all about thinking and cognition. And the trade-off is that we might be flattening richer, more deep, diverse learning into something that is a vertical ladder, right? So some of this challenge is I mentioned at UMBC, we issue micro-credentials anywhere learning is happening for credit, non-credit, curricular, co-curricular. And when I'm working with some of our co-curricular partners, some of these cognitive learning outcomes or cognitive framing they don't always resonate. Sometimes they do, but our folks in student affairs and in service learning, they really are interested in trying to measure affective competencies. So we want to make sure that we're being cognizant of that and being thoughtful about how we articulate and record and attest affective learning. So, I think under our current taxonomy, we're asking, you know, what did you know? What did you demonstrate? Who's saying that you did it? How well did you use it? We could also be asking, how did this learning experience change you? What different perceptions did you gain? How did your values shift? And be able to actually better record and attest that, both from an issuing perspective, but also from a earner perspective to be able to have that kind of asset. So again, we started asking questions, and some of those questions came from the fact that about 70% of our portfolio is this proficiency microcredential. This is really about skills that people are demonstrating through various learning contexts on our campus. I would argue that maybe this wasn't like poor design of our taxonomy or it wasn't um, negligence of any kind. It was just really reflective of the kind of learning outcomes that we would often see from folks who were thinking about, wow, a micro-credential would be really beneficial for the learners in this experience. So what ended up happening was, we would have things like still a week-long or multiple spanning semester experience that might still end up being in a proficiency just because of the assessment associated with that competency in that learning experience. And then we might have a day-long workshop. So again, what we were trying to do with the taxonomy in the first place was trying to set expectations and standards around um, the experiences, recognizing that micro-credentials can be flexible, but then we ended up with 70% of our portfolio within the same taxonomy. So it was almost like, did we just recreate the problem that we were trying to solve to begin with? So I really like thinking about it in the way that, maybe the structure and the way that we've been using the Bloom's learning outcomes that's telling us how high someone climbed. It's not telling us exactly which mountain they were on. And again, going back to the what did they gain in an experience and what did it mean to them to achieve that particular mountain, right? So again, what if we stopped building these taxonomies that are super vertical and linear? And what if our frameworks for how we design and create and think about micro-credentials could be as flexible as we know that micro-credentials can be? And that is where we're having conversations about pivoting from using Bloom's as the foundation to using Fink's taxonomy of significant learning. Fink's is about holistic, integrated learning, or significant learning, I should say, that I think it is a great uh, way to start blending and marrying the cognitive and affective, and maybe even arguably some extent psychomotor skills that folks, again, are crafting through their experiences. And we have students that are acquiring those particular competencies. So those six different types are within this taxonomy include the foundational knowledge, application, integration, human dimension, caring, and learning how to learn. And what's important about this is that this is, I'm going to mess up this word because of my Baltimore accent's going to come out. I cannot say hierarchical. I kind of did. I think I did it. Don't ask me the name of the vehicle that takes you to the hospital. I can't say that word either. So Sphinx is non-hierarchical by design, right? So no domain is higher or more important than another. And arguably, that's not true within the Bloom's framework, right? There's definitely a level of progression that you're trying to get folks to move towards. And that also impacts program design too, right? So a 400 level course probably isn't going to be focused on knowledge learning outcomes, right? So the interesting thing about the Fink's taxonomy isn't looking at each of these taxonomies separately, but the power comes from the interconnection and how do they interplay with one another and how learning gets scaffolded through these different types of learning experiences, again, to ultimately culminate into this one significant learning experience. So when just to go a little bit deeper on these six domains and how we've been talking about them and just added our own little flavor to them as well. The knowledge we're looking at core concepts and theories and information. So this is honestly things that might be happening within the curriculum, right? Things that students are being exposed to in course readings and lectures in any kind of asynchronous module might be a good example to be able to acquire some and learn about some of that knowledge about those concepts. Then we start kind of getting into like this application and integration, which is still being able to use this knowledge, then actually do something with that knowledge, right? So being able to take and apply it to different contexts, to be apply it to different disciplines and contexts. So in my work as this currently exists, knowledge application and integration are deeply familiar to our existing taxonomy where I think we're excited about the potential and possibilities. Again, how can we start thinking about affective competencies and recognizing that affective competencies are really important and really meaningful? Um, Institutionally, we know that we offer programs that expose these affective competencies, but they're often undocumented or they're not assessed, or we don't do a great job of adding some language and identifying with students that yes, you are acquiring some of these affective competencies, like the human dimension about self-awareness or thinking about new values, and really, arguably what higher education thrives at, which is helping people to have metacognition and thinking about thinking and learning how to learn, and finding out how to be the best learner. So we're thinking about Finks. We're excited about Finks because we think it offers us interesting depth to it. We could start applying it to more of our experiences. But we also are thinking about the level of application and depth and breadth to experiences. And this is really coming from we want our micro-credentials to be this Rosetta Stone between what we're doing on our campuses and how learners can use these assets anywhere else, whether it's going to grad school, they're going to an employer, or this is just for kind of their self-edification. Um, the thing that we keep hearing from employers is that they are looking for some signal about the depth and the exposure and how it relates to knowledge, skills, and abilities. So, with that in mind, we're thinking about this shift from the how do we write learning outcomes and what's the kind of learning framework there. We also are thinking about keeping the Dreyfus model for skill acquisition because that is what is resonating with employers. So, with that being said, the question then becomes, can we have this spirit of a here's that word again, non-hierarchical taxonomy while also having a conversation or a signal to outside stakeholders about the level of depth of experience? We think yes, and that is what we are kind of hoping to propose with our new taxonomy for microcredentials. So again, right now we have four primary micro-credential types, and then our fifth is our meta micro-credential, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But what I'm proposing here is actually looking at 18 types of micro-credentials. So this is covering across Finks's 6 domains at the 3 levels of learning depth in the Dreyfus model. So the idea is that we're going to have all of these, the different taxonomies from Finks here. And again, within each domain, so within the application domain, there still could be a mastery, proficiency, or exposure within application. And that's how you get to the 18 distinct micro-credential types. And I'm going to talk about 3 other ones. So we're not even done. This wheel doesn't even encompass everything. So 18 types sounds like a lot, and it is, and it's fair. But what I want to like push back on about the 18 types sounds like a lot. And again, I hear that. It's not about the label. Though I think one of the strongest reasons about why we create a taxonomy is because it's helpful for issuing entities, particularly higher ed institutions, for us to think about what makes this a microcredential? What makes this important? What are we trying to translate? What are we trying to articulate? So it's really about how are we kind of adding some expectations when there are so many different types of learning that's happening on our campuses, right? So I would say that the label and the type that or the number becomes less important. What matters is the really rich metadata, right? That metadata is telling the full story, right? So having a really rich description, not 2 or 3 sentences, but really describing what is going on, having learning outcomes right in the metadata, explicit earning criteria. So what does it mean that you had this, qualitative assessment? Well, if you had a qualitative assessment, you should be putting the rubric into the metadata somewhere as well, because then you can clearly see how that was evaluated. What are those skills tags that are going to be relevant? So again, the emphasis should always be back on the metadata that we're putting into micro-credentials. All of this kind of other stuff, I would say, I don't want to say it's less consequential, but in comparison to making sure that time energy and thought energy is put into really robust metadata, that's where the cycle should be at. Um, but recognizing that sometimes structure helps and helps us think about how we craft learning outcomes and how we operationalize those work. Understood. So then the goal is, or the hope, I should say, is that having so many different types gives us some different options, some different design expectations, and with that, we get the better, richer metadata. So the labels, they may not be perfect, but we're thinking about all of these opportunities for significant learning that are happening on our campus and just making sure that they are documented and articulated in the best way they possibly can be. So again, I mentioned that we had these 3 different layers, exposure, proficiency, mastery. Again, hoping that these map nicely to the Dreyfus model for words are hard, sorry. Dreyfus model for skill acquisition. So that exposure is being introduced to that particular concept or skill. Proficiency is where someone is going to be applying that, and then mastery is this expertise with high degree of transfer and adaptability. And the thought is that these 3 levels could be applied across Fink's taxonomy. there is an argument to be made that I would agree with that maybe like exposure and knowledge, maybe that doesn't make sense in a particular field. Maybe it makes a lot of sense in another field, right? So it's not that all of these have to be used, but the idea is that there are options. And with all of these options, we can have different expectations for the level of richness or depth to the metadata within the microcredential itself. So one of the examples that I like talking about and thinking through, I think it was the example I used in my article, but just thinking about baking. So if you think about within the, and I'm not a baker myself, so hopefully this is close to being right, but at any rate, if you think about baking in the application domain within things, right? So maybe exposure is learning a recipe or seeing it and having a conceptual understanding of what a recipe is going to do, or if I have all of these ingredients, how they're going to come together and eventually make something, that sounds like it would be exposure within this application of baking a cake, right? The proficiency is maybe that you actually are now independently starting to follow those instructions and you are independently baking that cake for yourself, right? You may have enough knowledge and insight to be able to adjust for heat or timing or whatever it needs to be. I think that that would all fall within proficiency. Then mastery is the okay, you had this experience with baking a cake. Now you're able to teach others how to bake cakes. And maybe you're even creating recipes on your own. Maybe you are coming up with something that's not even a cake, but you took the skills and knowledge that you had from baking a cake, and now you're able to make some awesome new dessert that we haven't even known yet, which great. That sounds awesome. So that is kind of at a high level how this model might apply in that example. And the hope and aspiration is that this is applying for things that we use across our curriculum. I think some of my pedagogical background and research is within civic learning spaces and citizenship and civic competencies more broadly. I think some of this could map pretty well there too, right? So some exposure is having an understanding of government structures and how that works. Maybe proficiency is, actually voting or helping others. And then mastery is like maybe you are leading a campaign or you are working with others to get out the vote or do something along those lines, right? So the goal is maybe we can start having conversations about what this looks like in specific fields and academic and co-curricular disciplines across our campuses. Now, I mentioned that I wasn't done, that we had 18 of those micro-credentials within the wheel, but I also had three outside the wheel. And the first one is this engagement type, and this is just a carryover from our current taxonomy. And that is because we recognize that there are still a non-zero number of use cases where we want to create non-credit micro-credentials for some other reason, right? And those other reasons may be about recognition, they could be about administrative tracking, um, it could be participation, it could be a incentive of some kind, right? It could also be a marketing tool, right? Like, how can we encourage folks to think about another type of experience within, our context? So we don't see engagement micro-credentials going away, as much as I'd love them to. So we recognize that they still need to be a part of our taxonomy, and we still need to consider some specifications for expectations around metadata for those. So meta microcredentials, again, they exist in our current taxonomy, and our philosophy about meta microcredentials is that they are purely symbolic, right? They represent that an individual has completed a pathway, right? So if there are five related microcredentials, they go into one meta microcredential so that those component microcredentials stacked into this meta microcredential. And you could have pathways that get super fun and interesting and complex where maybe one meta micro credential actually is on a pathway to another meta micro credential, right? So we want to acknowledge that we could build out some interesting pathways and give our learners some opportunities and options if they could see what those were right in front of them and give them a menu of these different experiences. So meta micro credentials are certainly incorporated into this as well. The new one that I'm excited about, and we've been having some conversations, is a holistic micro-credential. And this is because of using and leveraging Fink's taxonomy. Um, we started kind of pondering, like, what if there was a specific meta micro-credential where you actually did have to earn one micro credential from each domain, right? So from, the knowledge all the way to the meta learning, right? You have to earn at least one micro credential from each of those domains because then you would have been exposed or shown some depth, mastery, something to both the cognitive and affective competencies. So this is that recognition of significant holistic learning, right? So we're having some pretty cool conversations about what this might look like. And again, it's just kind of throwing it out there to get people thinking about what are the possibilities of how we can bridge those cognitive and affective competencies and bring them together in one space. So that's what the holistic meta micro credential is designed to do. So hopefully what this means in practice is, again, that we have a credential that's within one domain and one depth. Hopefully it's a clear name, clear meaning, um, easy to read, easy transferability, easy to understand. That's the goal, right? We have really, and we haven't accomplished this yet at UMBC, but something that we're looking at doing away with are things like level one badges or level two badges or tier one. And the reason for that is when we have had conversations with earners and employers, there's just ambiguity as to like, what does level two mean, right? Are we playing golf or are we playing basketball, right? Is lower better or is it worse? So we want to make sure that we have reduced as much ambiguity as we can. So that's why it's important to have some of these clear naming conventions and also resources that we can point to so that if someone is interested as to what does this mean? What were those expectations? We can easily provide those. So again, going back to the kind of premise of Fink's taxonomy, making sure that um, even if there are micro-credentials on a pathway, they don't have to be sequential. They don't have to be linear. We're just trying to understand and better capture these learning experiences. So with that being said, we think that this model could work for, again, going back to where micro-credentials show up at UMBC, across our institution, right? For credit, non-credit, curricular, co-curricular, and also exciting things like how can we think about this with professional development, right? We're having a lot of work done with our working learners, right? So, and students who are employed on campus. And what does professional development look like for them? Well, how can we be creating a micro-credential to recognize what that professional development looks like so that they can carry it forward for whatever's next again? So for different stakeholders, um, we're hoping that for learners, this is really affirming their growth and honors them as a full person, right? And not just um, rewarding or awarding specific types of competencies like cognition, right? We all know the really great test taker. We all know someone who isn't a great test taker, right? But how can we shift this to be about the competency wherever that shows up and however it shows up? So that's what we're hoping for our earners of our micro credentials. For our employers, we're hoping again that this is clarifying some of what's happening on our campus, that we're using better language. But again, we just keep hearing from employers about, durable skills, soft skills, 21st century skills, whatever you would like to call them. We keep hearing from employers time and time and time again that they are looking for folks with those durable skills. So our goal and hope is that shifting to this kind of framework is really going to illuminate more of where those durable skills show up and happen and what spaces on our campus, and how our learners acquire and even master some of those competencies. I'm hoping that this is adding something for maybe some more shared language across institutions, but really internally as well on our campus, so that um, we can talk the same talk across faculty and staff who are doing this work and the curriculum and the co-curriculum. And we're obviously hoping to continue to do research on our taxonomy and what this means for all of these three groups, and what this means for this iteration of design implications in the future as well. Shameless plug. Um, if you haven't checked it out, I don't even remember, but we wrote about our micro-credential review board at UMBC, and the infrastructure that we have for our micro-credentials. So no matter what taxonomy that we have, it's really important that there are practitioners that are using it and that there is governance around it, because that's what's adding strength, trust, and credibility behind all of these micro credentials. So, what's exciting is even if we begin to shift to this new taxonomy, our micro-credential review board is excited because they could continue to evaluate and review micro-credential proposals as they have been in the past. So we have a rubric that they can use to evaluate proposals and ask the question if it makes sense for UMBC to be offering a particular micro-credential or not. And they do so across 6 different standards, which is outlined in this chapter, and I have resources there as well. So highly recommend, if you haven't, to check out this resource as another possible framework that helps with governance and structure about micro-credentials. But again, we want to make sure that whatever taxonomy is in use is actually being used and is actually being vetted and reviewed by other faculty and staff. So I'm going to leave it with a couple of thoughts for folks. If you do have a taxonomy and you have been using it, I think some of the questions that I really have been thinking about is if other folks are they thinking about this, but is there room for affective learning or relational learning in your taxonomy? If it's really serving your learners, or maybe it's constraining not learners, but maybe it's constraining folks who are thinking about designing micro credentials, right? Or are there experiences of significant learning that's happening on your campus that you're unable to credential, that would benefit from it? So those were kind of the questions that we started with. So I'm always interested if other folks are thinking about the same thing, or where they're at. So I don't have all the answers. These are just some things that we're thinking through, and happy to have some more conversation. And so, more full candor here, we at UMBC have not moved to this taxonomy yet. We are planning to have a lot more conversations with our faculty and staff over the course of this summer, to really start asking if this does make sense to implement, and then more conversations about if we do implement it, what are those implications for the kind of those groups that I mentioned before. So that is what I will leave folks with. I talked for a long time, a lot of words. Thanks for listening to me. Hope it made sense. But yeah, those are all the things, and I'm happy to chat and answer all the questions, but I'll turn it over to Kyle.
Yeah. So we'll usually the way we do our Q&A here is that I go through the chat and pick out and invite folks who have already posted some comments to come on camera if they'd like to say a little bit more about what they put in there. So we have a few questions already. I'll answer the first one. Will we be able to get a copy of these slides? Yes, that should be a standing FAQ really for these webinars. Yes, we usually, with the speaker's consent, will be happy to post the slides and the recording of the webinar on our website. Um, so, Weston Rose, we are also having a conversation around microcredentials for professional development. Weston, if you want to come from me and say a little bit more about kind of your interests there. And honestly, if people want to use the raise hand feature on Zoom to share a little bit about what their institutions are doing, does this resonate? Do you guys have different taxonomies that you've developed on your own campuses and how they differ? I think that would be a great area of conversation as well. Weston, do you want to start?
Sure.
Weston?
Yes, sure thing. Thanks so much. Just a quick question. I work at the University of Texas System. Of course, we've been doing a lot with microcredentials in terms of students, but I'm also a part of a nonprofit professional development organization for academic advising, and we've been talking about, creating some micro credentials at the nonprofit level. We've actually already done it in our UT system level, and we have the micro credential for UT system academic advisors. But in the external organization where I've proposed this, there's been some skepticism about, well, if we were to provide micro credentials, what would that mean? We can't really force people, for example, to promote an academic advisor if they've earned a certain micro credential. And I just wonder, it may be early days, but I wonder if you have any advice about how you're thinking about micro credentials for professional development and how to really explain the value of those to people who might be not as familiar with micro credentials.
Yeah. Well, I'll chime in, but I'm also very happy to hear other people's thoughts as well. Yes. So I'll start with the context of, like I mentioned, our student workers. So we, um, over the past year, we've conducted interviews with a sample of our student workers on campus. And the kind of seminal finding from that was that the student employment experience is wildly inconsistent. It depends on what office a student is with, what their job title is, if there are job descriptions available. So what that has led to is we need better onboarding for our student workers, just generally speaking. I say all of that because, um, many of us get onboarded onto our jobs, and sometimes it just kind of feels like a whole day of just administrivia. And particularly for our student workers, we want to make sure that they actually see some transferable competencies and transferable knowledge from going through that experience. So that's why we're having some conversations now about how we add those micro credentials there. More broadly, when we look at professional development for staff and faculty, it's just going back to the well, where does this live? How do we know who went to this and what did they do? And that goes back to the, a purpose of micro credentials can be about that administrative intake, but more importantly, it is yes, you went to this training, but there also was a reason why you had to go to this training. And wouldn't it be great to be able to reflect on that and to be able to showcase and demonstrate that? So it's really going back to the evidence and the trust, and asking, where else would this live, and how do we give folks agency to be able to say that they did this thing? And we've been having for a number of years thinking about um, different faculty professional development, and that really matters, when folks are building their dossier for tenure and promotion review. How can we have micro credentials from faculty development workshops on campus be, operationalized? Well, we can offer a micro credential, and that micro credential might be an asset within their dossier, right? Um, so that was a really long-winded answer to say, um, I think it's important because professional development is great, but oftentimes you just go to a professional development experience, and as a recipient of that, you just have kind of the anecdotes, or you have your reflections and you have your thoughts. You may not have attestation about your actual experience. And from a design perspective, sometimes professional development experiences lack assessment or they lack alignment to what they were trying to achieve. So it actually, the design process might help strengthen professional development as well. So I'll stop talking because I'm rambling, but those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Very helpful.
There was also a question from Jennifer about psychometricians. Do we need psychometricians to be involved in the design of microcredentials? I mean, that's an interesting one. I can certainly say that George Washington, I'm not aware of psychometricians being involved, but Colin?
I'm not, I don't identify as one myself. I'm sure that they will be really great for validation. Um, I My background is in instructional design, so kind of home is
Mhm.
where the heart is, right? And I think instructional designers are an amazing Swiss Army knife of all the things. So I'm sure having a psychometrician would help, but I would rely on your instructional designer because they are your people.
They are great indeed. I will say, Amy McEnroth, are you working with? I mean, if you want to come off mute, actually, I didn't need to steal your thunder. If you want to say a little bit more about your question here around standards.
Sure. Hi. Sorry, I can't turn my video on for some reason, but I'm Amy McEnroth from Dallas College, Community College in Dallas, Texas. Just curious about whether or not you're working with any standard setting organizations like Wanted Tech or ASTM International or others to contribute to the thought leadership around truly standardizing this because we really want to get away from saying like micro credentials are a garbage term. Like we want them to
Yes.
be successful. So, what's your thought? What's your kind of perspective on contributing to the thought leadership there and with those types of organizations? And have you considered working with like an ASTM International or ISO to develop a national standard around this topic? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, is my short answer. Um, I'm deeply involved with One EdTech's implementation and creation of the trusted credential framework. So I've been working with them for a number of years on that, and very open to having more conversations, but that's been kind of where I have been at in this space over the past, but definitely open to more because I think you're exactly right. It's not helpful for us if we are all doing very disparate things in this space. It doesn't help anybody. So yes, any way that we can share resources and start to converge on this, that'd be wonderful. So yeah.
So, Wendy, do you want? Feel free to come off mute if you'd like to ask to speak about your question on recognition beyond colleges in Maryland and beyond, which is an important consideration for a state like Maryland, where they say that I think no point in Maryland is more than an hour's drive from another state, right?
Pretty much. Yeah, and although it can take you 3.5, 4 hours to get from one end of Maryland to
Baltimore
the other.
traffic, that's right.
And yeah, and Baltimore traffic. Yeah, no, thank you. And actually, my question is little. I think I was typing mine as Amy typed hers. She went a little bit broader. But that was, where I'm thinking, Colin, because you've already been a part of kind of a more, well, not even just Maryland, because you did the DC, metropolitan area and worked with organizations there. So that's why I was thinking this was just such a great idea, great concept, and if we could all adopt it. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts, and I think you answered that a little bit with Amy's question, but what your next steps might be.
It sounds like you and Amy are supporting my roadshow, so I'll
Hmm.
hit you both
Yeah.
up for budgets and tickets on that. No, I think it's I think it's more so. Again, I'm really about so Noah Geisel from UC Boulder, I think one of the things that he always says that really made me think about this is what if we're wrong, right? Like there's a
Mhm.
non-zero chance that our taxonomy was wrong, right? And that has just always kind of been in the back of my brain and why I think that we should keep having these conversations. But I
Mhm.
honestly think it's groups like this, having being, presenting at conferences, I think they're just we should be having more conversations about this, right? does this make it's okay if it doesn't make sense. I'm not going to get my feelings hurt. The goal is how can we start to converge and adapt a framework that is adaptable for all of us across institutions, so that we can have even more shared language. So I'm believing in the power of community and trying to get more of that out.
Thanks. Thanks. That's a good answer.
Which is an excellent reason to register for the MCRN conference, by the way, next month if you've not already done so. I I have to get in at least I have to get at least three plugs today for the conference because this will be our last webinar before we most of us hopefully will get a chance to meet in person in DC next month. Um, Jennifer, if you want to come off mute actually, and feel free to do so.
Sure, thank you. So my question is, I come from an accreditor in nursing professional practice. I also sit on a board for competency-based education. So my question is really around what's happening in the marketplace related to micro-credentials and board certification firms and or board certifying accrediting bodies creating, I don't want to say rules and regulations, but that's what it feels like around micro credentials. So essentially tapping into the space of micro credentials when they're not seeing the numbers in terms of board certifications in a variety of sectors, healthcare being one. And what's your position on it? Are you aware of that happening? Is it a positive disruptor or is it creating more confusion in the marketplace versus the history of micro credentials being awarded by either accredited academic institutions or, in this case, our stakeholder group, which include colleges and universities, but also any accredited provider of education, like a medical education group or a specialty nursing organization or even a healthcare organization. And that's the professional development space.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. And UMBC, we don't have medical school. Woohoo! Or maybe not. I don't know. So I'll answer from kind of my seat and what I know about, which is kind of what you were hitting on about accreditation. So I'm deeply familiar with our accreditation process. We literally just went through our middle states process just 2 weeks ago and we passed. Woohoo! And that's over. Another woohoo. So there are many, I have noticed many accreditors across the country that are starting to take up, again, use whatever word you want to and spin a wheel. Micro credentials, alternative credentials, non-degree credentials, whatever. Same general premise, right? Um, do I think it's good or bad? I don't think that there's an easy answer to that. I think it's nuanced. If there's something that can help the field, again, reach some consensus and convergence and have expectations, and particularly thinking about if the structures are similar, what that could mean for learner mobility, right? So if you are a student in California and you have micro credentials and then you move across the country to Maryland, how can you be able to leverage those, right? So maybe having, accrediting bodies be a facilitator in that could be a wonderful, great thing, right? Um, Again, I just went through middle states and that was fun. So like thinking through like some of the challenges with agility, right? Because we know that we want to create micro credentials and be responsive to faculty, staff, and employer needs, right? And if institutions can, or issuers, I should say, can maintain that flexibility and agility, with quality behind it and with trust, those all sound like wins to me. So I think it just, there's some complexity in there and a couple of variables, but I don't think I don't think it's good or bad. I think it's to be determined.
So Amy has a question about alignment with credential registries, and that kind of speaks to the same issue. Um, and so I mean, I it would kind of address that, but do you want to say anything more about do we need LER? Do we need more credential registries?
Yes and yes. Um, and I again, it just I just keep thinking back on the yes, this is this framework for all these different types of micro-credentials and the
Yeah,
expectations behind them, but it's the metadata. Like we
yeah,
really, really need to have really, really, really rich metadata that's going into these micro-credentials. So I really think that yes, we need more LERs and credential registries and credential registries at different levels too, right?
mm,
Like and in different contexts, so that makes sense. Um, but these things are only going to be as good as the information that we put into them and how learners are able to use them and utilize them. So,
yeah. Regis, someone, by the way, Regis, well, we haven't seen you in a bit. Glad to see you're still engaged with NCRN. If you do want to jump on camera, feel free. If not, we
oh,
can
I think you're
go
on
through.
mute. I th
Oh,
There
Sorry
you
about
go.
that. Thank you.
yeah.
Um, so question around the involvement of employers in this work. Ultimately, there is such an amount of micro-credentials or whatever we call it that employers are confused. They don't know what to trust, and often they come up with their own assessments to uh, to look at technical or functional skills. How do you engage employers in those conversations?
Yep. So we're really excited about this. It is on our summer roadmap that we are actually going to have more direct engagements with some of UMBC's top employers. So UMBC, working with our Career Center, they solicit folks that have different booths and whatnot. We're going to just start offering them webinars. We're going to say, here's what micro credentials are at UMBC. Here's what we mean when we say metadata. Here are those skills tags that you're probably interested in, and here is how you might be using this during your application process. So we're planning to have a more direct role with employers because I think that that's been kind of one of those things is that we're just kind of treating employers as this like I can't even think of the words. We're just one body, right? And like, what's going on, right? And I think that we're trying to just take a more proactive approach with employers that we know, are interested in UMBC students. So, okay, how can we engage with them and, get some direct feedback with them, but more importantly, educate them about what micro credentials are. So, definitely a work in progress, and we're excited about it. But it's definitely an area that we've recognized that we need to grow in and have, again, that kind of proactive role with them.
That's great. And I mean, we all know that employer engagement is such a big topic across higher education these days. It sounds, let me ask you actually on that subject, Colin, are there any employers who have who we talk about like contract training often in community colleges where the employer will actually kind of directly dictate a curriculum. Do you have any arrangements like at that level of employer engagement at UMBC, or is it all kind of employers as in consultation with the faculty, but it's still very much faculty led?
So overwhelming majority, it is the latter of what you described, is that,
Yeah.
there might be employers in consultation. Over the years, we have, through our
Mhm.
Institute of Extended Learning, which is our non-credit side of
Right.
the
Non-credit.
house, we have had employers come to us in that space, and we've designed and offered what they've been looking for directly. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, certainly, this question of employer. I mean, I feel like it's a central question that just comes up again and again in our NCRN meetings. We are, one of the few places where we have these conversations, I think, around, in what extent do employers, and when we talk about employers, of course, that can mean many different things from the C-suite to HR, the frontline hiring managers. But to what extent do they actually understand and make sense of differences between different types of micro credentials? So, I mean, definitely keep us posted. I think as a network, I think we're interested in learning more about, whenever you have those kinds of conversations, do employers understand, and how can we make this kind of information more clear to employers? And I think frameworks like what we proposed and talked about today definitely help. So we are down to 3 minutes and down to the final 25 of you hanging on here. So if anybody has any final questions, we can take one or two more. Hearing none, I would say that we can give everybody back a minute or two in their day. Thank you so much, Colin. Extraordinarily helpful, extremely interesting. We will, and we hope we'll see you, and we'll hope we'll see everyone else at the Inserian Spring Conference in just under a month. All right, everyone, take care. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you all. Appreciated it.
Thank you. Bye bye.
See ya.